This program is made possible in part by Cerisi Conlon LLP, protecting the future and using the law as a force for good in both the courtroom and our communities. Online at cerisiconlon.com.
Hello and welcome. When I think about the friends I have, and my relatives, and people I've worked with as a social worker, I think almost every couple and every person in a relationship has to do some pretty hard work to keep it strong, to keep it healthy. And it's not as easy, I think, as young couples who are getting married or deciding to live together think. So I thought it'd be great to talk today about things that make relationships work and things that are hard on relationships. And with me is the perfect guest, I think, to help us out in getting better at this. My guest is Dr. Ronald Asiimwe, and he is new to Minnesota.
Yes.
He comes to us from Michigan State University. Prior to that, he grew up in Uganda, and he is now at the Family Social Science Department.
Yes.
And your exact title, assistant or associate professor?
Assistant professor.
Assistant professor.
Yes.
And your couples and therapy title, what is the exact title?
Couple and family therapist.
That's right.
Yes.
So it's wonderful to have you here. I think you can help us all get some better things going here in relationships.
Yeah.
One of
Thanks
the
for
things,
having me.
Oh, you're welcome, welcome. As I read your CV, I thought your interest in couples and in relationship, parenting, etc., must have started pretty early.
Yes.
And how did that evolve like that in such an early way?
Yes. Well, that's a very loaded question. I was a very relational child growing up. I come from a big family of 12.
Really big.
Really big family. I'm the second last born. But growing up, I was very relational. I loved sitting close to my mother. I loved my mother's hugs. And it went on and on. When I went to high school, I led different high school clubs, but some of the social clubs, particular one that I led was a relationship club where we just met as a club and talked about relationships. And by then, nobody ever talked about relationships because in the African context, nobody talks about dating and coupling. But
so that's considered very private?
Very private. It's taboo. You don't do it until you're 18.
Okay.
You dare not tell your parents you have a girlfriend or boyfriend. But I went away and did it anyway. I led a relationship club. And it went on until I went to college and was interested in people and relationships and human behavior. And I studied psychology. And it was in my second year of my psychology education that I took a class called Family Mental Health and Relationships. And that's where I got fascinated by the idea of couples and families and adult love. And then moved on to looking at family therapy. I kept going.
Track going.
Yes. Yes.
That is so kind of unusual, I think, although, you know, some children think very early about what they want to do and do it like you have, but not a lot.
Yes.
Well, when we think about couples here in the United States and around the world right now, the pandemic always is still on our minds, obviously. And do you think that really hurt most couples, or sort of what's your take on the effect of something global like that?
Yes, definitely. The pandemic was a it took a big toll on couples, a lot of relationships. Now, I didn't say this, but I'm a researcher as well. I look at research, I look at couples and relationships and how, for example, the impact of the pandemic was really huge on many couples. There were mixed, effects. While some couples they saw it as a time to bond and stay together, and maybe learn more about each other and learn more about navigating the different negative cycles they had developed and maybe not recognized because they were apart from each other, working every day, taking care of kids. But the pandemic brought them together, forced them to be in the same place for a long time.
Forced them to be together,
yes. Yes. But on the other hand, we also saw that a lot of people separated. It was time together, and they realized maybe we are not meant to be together. So I saw that in my practice as well, where there were lots of separations and lots of conflicts, and lots of divorce as well. So mixed effects.
Overall, do you think there was more trouble because of it, or more success because people got to know each other in a more deep way?
As a couple and marriage therapist, I want to say the positive thing that that people got closer to each other. Majority of the people, at least that I saw in my practice, they got to figure out themselves and got to get closer and closer. A few people got to get far away and distant from each other, but on a larger scale, majority of people use this as a time to be together and grow in their relationship.
That's good to hear.
Yes.
When I think of couples and difficult things, I think there are some that are really quite sort of universal. And one of the hard things, I think, is that quite often if one in the couple is unsatisfied or just wants to really work more on the relationship and the other one doesn't, it's so hard, I think, to navigate that. And it seems like the no person, the one that says, I don't think we need it, or I don't want to do it, has a little more power. But how do you help people who are different like that?
Wow, that's a very loaded question. Excuse me. I think the best starting point for me is to start with empathy. When couples come to my room, you always have one who doesn't want to be there, and you have one who wants it to work. And so it's sort of, you have almost two people that are together but not together.
Right.
So I always start with empathy and highlighting the fact that this is hard to do. You're coming to me and I'm asking you to talk about hard stuff in life, and that is talking about your relationships. Where I come from, we have a proverb that says, the secrets of the house never go out, right? And so when couples come to see me, I hold this framework in my mind that says, these are secrets of the house that shouldn't go out. So I start by showing the empathy to them. I say, this is hard to talk about. And then really for me to get them because really as a couple therapist, you're working to get buy-in for people. You're holding the space that people will want to change and they want to see the relationship thrive. And so I reframe. Really, a reframe is a fancy therapeutic jargon to mean putting a different spin or frame on the problem, what has brought them to therapy. And I always tell them, if you're fighting, it means that there's something worth fighting for.
There's a positive spin, all right.
Yes, yes. Because if there wasn't something worth fighting for, i.e. that is your relationship, you wouldn't be fighting anyway. Each one of you would be in different corners
care.
of the world. You wouldn't care, right? And I always find my couples receptive to that. Even the one who is saying no and leaning out, usually they give it a try.
That's an engaging way to bring that more reluctant partner into the discussion.
Yes.
And it must have worked. You must have seen that work.
Yes.
And they could use that in the kitchen or at home too by saying, don't get so upset if you don't care, right?
Yes, yes.
Right.
Yes.
There are some other common, I think, issues between couples, and one that comes to mind is honesty.
Yeah.
Sometimes being brutally, as we sometimes call it, brutally honest,
Yes.
can be hard on the other person or can set up some real tensions. But yet, I want to hear from you. Do you think we need to be totally honest?
The modality that I use in my practice says we need to be totally honest, because decades of research have shown that adult love is based on secure connection, and secure connection is built on honesty and trust.
I'm jumping here, but I want to cover some other sort of tricky things for couples, and one that I think is very hard for almost every couple is talking about sexual needs or differences or complaints, or when one person wants to have a higher level of intimacy than the other.
Yes.
How do you help people navigate that?
Wow, that's there's three things that actually usually go together when couples come to see me, but I'll stick to your question on sex, but it's usually money, sex, and children.
In that order?
Sometimes they don't go in that order, but you usually see
Those three.
across all the couples that I see, yes, so three are usually, one is usually more than the other. But in terms of sexual differences, this is very common. We see it all the time. I see it in my practice. Now in the US, I've practiced in 2 states, Oklahoma and Michigan. And it's very consistent across the board that 2 people get together and they just have different needs in terms of sex. How do we help them? How do I help them get along? Is one, to begin talking about it. A common pattern that I've found across all my couples is that people get into this thing called a relationship and they do not talk about, they talk about every other thing, but they do not talk about sex.
That's what I've thought too.
And so a lot of the process in therapy is to even help them to begin to talk about their history with sex, how they grew up in families, how did they talk about sex, what
and
did
probably
they learn?
quite different in
Yes.
most couple relationships.
Yes. So it's really therapy to help them sort of do this sexual history, explore their values around sex. It's not always that we're different in terms of what we want in sex, but it's about we see it different, right? And so if we see it different, then we have different needs. So I go back to the families of origin. We start there. How was sex talked about? Was it even a thing? Or was it taboo? And I tend to find that many people get uncomfortable. And so a lot of the differences and the problems around sex are usually tied to how people are raised to think about sex. There's this idea in research called sexual shame. People feeling shame about even mentioning, I always talk to parents about helping their kids to say the private parts, their names. Because why is it that we say the nose, the eye, but we can't say the penis or we can't say the vagina? So we go there. We start by talking about history with sex and how it was approached in families. And usually couples find their way around that. And then we talk about preferences and who wants it more, who wants it less. That's always easy when people have an understanding of where the other person is coming from.
So you kind of gradually help them get more and more specific and more and more maybe vulnerable.
Yes, yes, vulnerable, specific, but also understand where it's all coming from. I think that's always key. Yeah.
I read once that a therapist said when he was working with couples who were having all kinds of disagreements, not just about sex, he said he asked them to touch the other person's hand while they were talking.
Yeah.
And that, he said, made this really nice difference with a lot of couples, probably not all. But I thought, that's a little tip that might be helpful for couples.
Yeah. It's called sensate focus.
Yeah.
There's this whole idea called sensate focus where, because a lot of research around sex has found also that sexual problems are due to the fact that we are raised in a culture to just be performers in the bedroom. So people develop performance anxiety around sex, and so they don't really enjoy it. They go in to perform, especially I find that for men. So Sensate focus is to help people to learn to even touch, to be sensual without being sexual. So that could be one of
Part
where
of
that person got the
build up
idea.
that way.
Yeah.
Well, this is all helpful. Now, money, you mentioned money. That's a biggie for probably also most couples.
Yeah.
Either they spend and save it very differently, or there isn't enough, or maybe they have so much that can change life in some ways that are difficult too.
Yeah.
So is this an area that you have any tips that you've found helpful with couples?
About money. Ooh. Again, it's talking about it. It's bringing it to the table. It's sometimes with some couples I found that I have to recommend that they find a financial advisor. But normally it starts by people not talking about it. I get couples who say we keep secret bank accounts. And for me as a couple therapist, I encourage people to be honest and talk about even that. Because a lot of times when people keep these secrets called bank accounts, then all sorts of things happen. I don't know how much goes into my partner's account. She doesn't know how much goes into my account. And all of a sudden, all other things keep happening. Which account do we use for spending on children at home? All those. So really helping people to talk about those things and navigate, look at their income, and then figure out how much goes where, who spends on what. It's really, really facilitating a conversation around money. Again, that's another topic people are not comfortable to talk about. Goes back to family of origin. It was never talked about usually because money is also a very sensitive issue that people don't talk about.
And again, the way your parents spent money is most likely the way you're proceeding too.
Yes. Yes.
When one is kind of reckless and one is very cautious, do you usually see there's a chance to bring the reckless spender into a more, sane kind of approach?
So the type of therapy that I work from really puts these old behaviors into what we call a cycle, right? Pursuer, withdrawer. And so, and I'm going to try and make that very simple. It's really this idea that's built on the theory of attachment, that as humans, we all long to bond and be in close connection with the people that we love, right? And that longing started when we were young. And so when you have all these disagreements about money and sex, it's usually about the longing for connection. I want to connect, I want to feel close to my partner. So if I can help people feel close to each other, then money will not be a problem because they're going to talk about it. They have this strong bond together. So really helping people, putting every behavior they're bringing into a cycle, looking at who is pursuing and who is withdrawing and how are they withdrawing. Normally, in the context of money, when you have a withdrawer, they usually withdraw into other behaviors, gambling. They start hiding credit cards. They take it, they go to video games. So it's bringing this topic into the cycle. So as you're out there, as you're gambling, what are you telling yourself? What are you feeling about this relationship that you left your partner home and you're gambling, right? So I'm helping them to really see that whatever they're doing, they're missing their spouse and they need to connect back.
So they're maybe escaping some of the stuff they should be dealing with, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's, again, so interesting, Ronald. Let's hit the third wheel here, or the third spoke, the parenting. And I think there are so many couples, I think, so excitedly look forward to baby number one and baby number two, But at some point, I think it becomes stressful for the couple, no matter how much love there is.
Yes.
How do you help people deal with taking care of the relationship as well as being a great parent?
Wow, that's a big one too. That's a big one because it goes into people, again, it's looking at the stage of the relationship where they are at. And so the number one really way to help couples who have, newly married and now they have child number one and number two coming is to help them accept that, maybe the relationship has to shift a little bit. In therapy, there's this whole idea called homeostasis, that families and couples are always resisting change, right? That, and how that looks like is a couple that had no children, now kids come in, but they still want to behave like the kids are not in. They want to go to movie nights. They
can do it all.
They can do it all, right? And so it's really to help the couple to accept that, look, this is shifting, and so now we have to realign our roles and responsibilities to accommodate the new family members. And so it starts with talking about it and putting it in the center and saying, this has changed. But also helping them not to forget themselves as a couple, because they chose each other first before the kids came in. And so I like to encourage couples to have alone time, because a lot of couples get lost into parenting. And I often get couples tell me, one spouse will say, I feel like I've lost my spouse to the children. And so it's important to I always remind them, have alone time, create time for children, but also create time for yourself as a couple. Because 18 years from now, they'll be gone, and you're back together. And a lot of couples never know what to do when they're back together.
Right.
They can't
that
seem to remember what this
empty
nest
syndrome, right?
Yes.
And it's probably usually a gender thing, I'm guessing, Ronald, right? Where the husband or the male says to the woman, you're losing yourself in the children.
Yes.
Primarily it goes that way, doesn't it?
I've always, for the most part, for the stereotypical, traditional family structures we've had, yes, it always goes that way, where you have a mom be a stay-at-home mother, and it makes so much sense that they are close and they have more time with the kids. And so in therapy, I see mostly men complaining, I've lost my spouse to children, or I feel like I've lost my spouse to children. And so yes, in the traditional kind of marital structure, it's looked like that.
Having a date night, getting it on the calendar.
Yes.
I mean, we read about that as a good strategy, and it is, I think, too.
It's hard to do practically.
But yes, because maybe someone comes home with a fever from school,
Yes.
or
Yes.
you've got a work assignment that makes the date impossible, or whatever, right?
Yes.
We've only got 5 minutes left, but I have one more kind of common marital issue question. When couples are having a hard time, quite often, one of the go-to remedies, or thought of as a remedy, I think we need to take a time apart. Let's separate. Let's see if we can appreciate each other if we get, separated. Is that usually more harmful than good, or is it usually therapeutic and helpful?
Mary, that's a very contentious question in our field. And I know a lot of therapists out there who are watching this have different ways of dealing this. It goes back to your theoretical orientation and your practice. For me, I see separation and distance as adding more to the problems that the couple is already having.
I thought you might say that based on...
Yes. My goal is to try and keep the couple as close as possible to each other. Now, there are exceptions, and for me, in my practice, my biggest exception is if there's abuse and it's active and ongoing, then maybe a separation or a time apart might be recommended.
Right.
But in a space where I'm trying to help them get connected, get to learn each other again and learn to live with each other, I want them to stay as close as they can, because the distance gives more room for other things.
So when you say abuse, Ronald, do you mean emotional abuse as well as any kind of physical or sexual?
Yes, emotional abuse, sexual.
And so that could in that case, it could be that a separation is desirable.
Yes. Yes.
Well, we're almost out of time. Do you have a favorite podcast or book or article or television show or something that you would recommend that people check out?
Yes, many. I'm a book nerd, I'm a podcast nerd, so I'm going to highlight a few. For individuals, I really recommend, for my individual clients, I see a lot of clients struggling with perfectionism. So I highly recommend The Gifts of Imperfection by Dr. Brené Brown. That's a wonderful book that I've found working miracles in my own life. For couples, I really recommend a book called Hold Me Tight.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yes, it's by Dr. Sue Johnson, who developed really this great model for couples called emotionally focused therapy. And in Hold Me Tight, there's really 7 conversations to help couples get going with whatever is going on in their relationship. And then for parents, I like 2 resources to recommend. One is by Dr. Dan Siegel. It's called Parenting from the Inside Out. It's based in attachment theory to really help the parent reflect on how they are raised and how those patterns are transmitted to how they raise their kids. And then the last one is a podcast called The Balanced Parent podcast by Dr. Laura Fryen.
And what is her last name?
Laura Fryen, The Balanced Parent.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, 6 really good things to know. We will put those up, on the screen so you'll see them as you hear this. Well, thank you so much for coming down and joining me and sharing a lot of wonderful, wonderful ideas.
This was fun, very insightful. I loved it. Thanks
I
for
wish we had more time, but we've got a lot of food for thought, as we say, and
Yes.
I appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you have felt good about this like I have. I'm sure you do. Have a good week next week, and I'll be back, and we'll have another great guest. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.